About 3 months ago, I created and put together a pretty objective and fair documentary covering the life story of Nick Fuentes, as I find Nick Fuentes to be one of the most gifted speakers that I've ever heard in my life under the age of 30. In fact, I'm willing to go as far to say that I find Nick Fuentes to be one of the most impressive intellectual individuals that I've ever heard before as it pertains to drawing on history and politics easily of the past 2 decades, right? I think the guy is extremely impressive. I think he says a lot of truth, and I don't think it should come as a surprise to many people why it is to some extent that this man has been banned all over the place over the past decade. But Nick Fuentes is also a liar. Nick Fuentes manipulates the facts, and when the facts don't support or when the data no longer supports the nonsense that he's espousing, he doubles down in his ignorance. And what I've noticed, not all the time, but a lot of the time, his base still supports him in his ignorance. Nick Fuentes is also a PDF file, and it's not about ad hominems. I'm going to let you hear from Nick himself on what he feels about the age limit when it comes to dating and the age gap as well.
Oh yeah, Didi got a podcast.
Welcome back to another episode of Didi Got a Podcast. Of course, I'm your host, Didi. Let me say as a disclaimer before I hop into this video today about Nick Fuentes, for those of you out there that are critical of Nick Fuentes or even agree with many of the things that I'm going to say in this video today, shout out to you. However, I do want to state that calling so-called Black individuals that watch Nick Fuentes' show or agrees with a lot of the things that Nick Fuentes says, calling those individuals coons or raccoons or bootlickers or self-hating blacks isn't helping anybody, bro. Simply resorting to ad hominems simply because they're agreeing with Nick Fuentes for the truth that Nick Fuentes says about a lot of things is not helping you. It only makes you look a lot weaker, especially when they're agreeing with things that Nick Fuentes is saying that is true. All right, so with that said, I'm going to go ahead and hop into this Piers Morgan Nick Fuentes debate, conversation, whatever, from a couple of days ago that I've been meaning to get to, but other things have come up and I've had to do videos on other people in other situations. Hit the like button on your way in if you do not mind. Now let's get into it. Let's go.
I always believe everybody is a product of their environment. Right? I've interviewed thousands of people. Maybe 3, 4, 5,000 people.
I definitely disagree. I do not believe that people are necessarily a product of their environment. I believe that people are a product of their decision making. Right? I do believe that environment plays a role, but I think ultimately what it's going to come down to is what you as the individual decide to do. I think that plays a much heavier role or just as important of a role as your environment.
From all different walks of life. But the one common theme I would say is everyone's a product of their environment. And I was reading some stuff about you in the last few days. There was an episode of your podcast where you talked about your father, Bill Fuentes, and how he wouldn't take the family, including you, to certain restaurants because he believed they were associated with African Americans. We would be deciding where to go to eat, you said. What are we going to do for dinner tonight? It was a running joke. Me and my sister would say Applebee's, and my dad would say we would never eat at Applebee's. Not in a million years should you be caught dead, Fuentes said about Applebee's. Go to a different restaurant, a local restaurant. No Applebee's, no Red Lobster. That is commonly known as black fare. And you also shared another story about your family and restaurants. It said, before me and my sister were born, my family had a saying about Olive Garden that contains the N-word that we're not allowed to say. So my question, based on that anecdote that you say on your own podcast, is do you think you grew up in a racist environment? That your father was inherently racist and that thought process moved to you?
Well, I would say it's a new low. I've been attacked for being a racist many times, but to attack my father, to attack my parents based on anecdotes, I would say that's sort of a new low.
Hang on.
Okay, so I've seen other people react to this and they said they agree, even though they're very critical of Nick Fuentes, specifically or particularly in this interview with Piers Morgan, they're very critical and disagree with many things that Nick Fuentes said. They said this part, they actually agree with Nick, that this was a low, sort of hitting up below the belt for Piers Morgan to mention Nick Fuentes' father. I actually disagree with those people. I think this is fair game. Number one, Nick Fuentes has mentioned his own family and his own father himself on his podcast, which is specifically what Piers Morgan is referring to. It's not like he's just making a blanket statement about his dad just out of the blue. But even more important, if you've listened to any of Nick Fuentes' podcasts, which I have, if you've listened to his clips, his extended clips, 10, 15-minute clips, What is Nick Fuentes known for doing? I mean, very popular for doing. Mentioning people's families and their backgrounds. Let's start with Tucker Carlson. He's talked about Tucker Carlson's father being involved in the CIA, etc., many times. That's not fair. Tucker Carlson's father is not only not able to defend himself because he's not present, but Tucker Carlson's father will never be able to defend himself because he's no longer alive. Candace Owens. Nick Fuentes has mentioned Candace Owens' backstory, which I think is fair game. I think he's mentioned Candace Owens' marriage. He's mentioned Candace Owens' husband, who hasn't been present to defend himself. But he's also mentioned Candace Owens' husband's parents and what they do for a living and how it's suspicious. Ian Carroll. I'm going to talk about this later in my live today. Nick Fuentes has mentioned Ian Carroll's backstory. So this is something that he engages in quite a bit, but he's going to pull the victim card, which, by the way, something he claims to not be a fan of. But Nick Fuentes, regardless of all the things that we agree with Nick about, Nick Fuentes is one of the biggest victims on the internet. All he's doing is complaining about how white people are being genocided, which they're not, how white people are the victim to elite Jewish individuals, as if white people can't strategize, as if they're not smart enough to overcome that. But he's making fun of quote unquote minorities for pulling the victim card. It's hypocrisy.
It's your anecdote.
Yeah, but he's not here to defend himself.
You are.
And my parents are.
You told the story.
And I will. And
as I said at the start, Nick, to be clear.
No, it's not an ambush.
Nick, I'm not ambushing you. I'm literally reading an anecdote that you revealed on your podcast.
Bingo.
It's you that's put it in the public domain.
I know.
I'm simply asking you whether my assessment of that, which is that your father didn't want to take you to certain restaurants because of what you refer to as, they were commonly known as black fare, whether that attitude to African Americans in that instance permeated to you. It's a reasonable question.
Yeah, no, like I said, I think everybody knows what that is, but I'll address it. I'll engage with it, and I'll defend my father from the charge of racism.
Sure.
No, my parents are not racist, and they've never been racist. I'll tell you about my parents. They used to have a school in Chicago in the South Loop where they instructed people on how to shoot firearms. It was a security school, and most of the clients were black.
So let me just say this for the record. Obviously, racism in its origin is evil, but it's not something that I focus on this channel. I've often said on this channel that what I care about is quote unquote high level racism. I think I care about the racism that happened on a deeper level, but everyday racism, I don't care about that. Like, if it don't stop me from being able to live my life comfortable, I don't care about it. People are allowed to feel the way that they want. Now, if you're preventing people from getting jobs and affecting people's livelihood because of it, then that's different. But let me just state for the record, Nick Fuentes stating that your dad had a company and his clients who were paying him money to do something because they were black people, that means that your dad isn't racist, is such a low IQ rebuttal.
And I believe actually one of their clients was Larry Hoover's son at one point, sort of a funny story. And so
that's not funny. That's actually very suspicious, because I already have my suspicions about you being a plant. And the fact that you're affiliated with some of these people is more of a reason for me to believe that, because Larry Hoover is somebody that Kanye West is very heavily into, or very invested into getting released for all the years that he's been locked up. But I digress.
Most of their clients would come in from the south side of Chicago. My grandmother, she grew up in the projects in the city. And so my family, being in Chicago, being ethnics, being Italian, Irish, Mexican, in the west side on Taylor Street, all over the city. My family for many generations have lived near and around black people. And look, my views about black people and their views about black people are shaped with experiences with black people. And what they will tell you, what my parents would say if they...
Which is fair, by the way.
They were here, is that for many, many years, the older generations of black people were very respectful, very humble, very decent. In fact, my grandma used to have an anecdote. She grew up in a lot of dysfunction. Her mother was mentally ill, and they would be having dinner in the projects, and there'd be so much chaos and dysfunction and disagreement and fighting. And she would look across the way out the window at a black family in the other apartment, and they'd be holding hands around the table saying grace. And this is sort of the culture that used to prevail. But now what you have in the city is that there's no accountability for the black people. And now Chicago has become a complete dump, because these teenagers go out and they take over the city. They call them teen takeovers. That's the euphemism for it. They're teenagers, but they all come from the same neighborhood. They drive up there and they mug people and attack people, and they destroy cars and destroy shops We had the Festival of Lights a couple of weeks ago. It's supposed to be a family event, and they light up the trees, and there's a big parade. I was in the parade one year, and you had a bunch of black people there shooting each other. 7 people shot, a 14-year-old killed in the Magnificent Mile.
This is my thing with Nick Fuentes. Everything that he's saying is fair game. Here's the problem, Nick Fuentes, and this is what I mean when I say Nick Fuentes is so intelligent that he understands how to manipulate his own audience, because he knows a lot of them are lazy. They're not going to do their own research. We're going to get into this later in the video when we talk about the data. But Nick Fuentes knows that many people are going to look at him this way. Nick Fuentes is right about X, Y, and Z. Well, surely Nick Fuentes can't be wrong about this. Clearly, he can't be wrong about that. Surely he's not lying about those numbers. So let's just take him at his word. But no, you should not do that. You should always test everything that someone is saying to you, even if you agree or like the person. The fact of the matter is, Chicago is one of the heaviest and thickest gang-infested cities, especially major cities, in all of America, really in the world. Chicago, New York is another hotbed, St. Louis, Detroit, Los Angeles, not Los Angeles as well, different parts of California. You have to take that into consideration. Right? Most black people are not gang members. Most black people are not indulging in these things. Bro, you live in Chicago, for crying out loud. You all have owned the murder capital crown, I don't know how many years. You're not going to take that into consideration when you're generalizing an entire group of people?
And I know there's a lot of black people that feel the same way about this. They say, we've lost control of the city and we're looking for accountability. We have a lot of black people that are always outraged about racism, outraged about attitudes from white people, but they're never ashamed of some of these behaviors, never ashamed of some of the things that go on. And that's why I think there's a lot of negative attitudes these days.
And I can guarantee you that those percentage of so-called black individuals that you just named, Nick Fuentes, is minute. It's a very, very small percentage of so-called black people that are complaining about racism, yet does not feel secondhand or even firsthand embarrassment from the crime that's happening in our community.
And so, again, I think those attitudes, you say I'm a product of my environment. I am. And so are my parents and my grandparents. Unlike you, because you're not even American, in Chicago, we have to live in a big, diverse city where there's a lot of different kinds of people. And I think I'll tell you the same.
I live in London. It's one of the biggest and most diverse cities in the world.
But it's not the same.
It literally is the same, though, because, and I'm going to tell you why, even though I would agree with Nick that it's not like that everywhere in the world, even the places that are diverse, it literally is like that in London. So this is one of the many things in this interview it got wrong, right? London actually deals with crime too. London is actually very diverse, and there are different parts of London that people avoid because of this reason.
It's a big, diverse city. The only difference is we don't have the gun violence because we don't have guns. That's a whole different story. I don't want to get into that with you. I have got into that before in America.
You got a knife problem. You got sword problems.
We have problems with
Aladdin.
We have problems with violent crime. I make no pretense of it. So the idea that somehow I'm cosseted in London because I'm not in Chicago.
I didn't say that.
Well, you kind of implied it, but I guess my point about the environment, I'm not saying you are a product of your environment. I'm saying most people are in some capacity. When I read that anecdote, which just to remind you, it's not something I have put out there. You told this story, right? And you said...
You said this. We're looping. You said this
No, but you haven't really directly, I think, responded to it, which is whether your father would not take you to certain restaurant chains because he associated them with black Americans. Is that true?
Well, see here, if you're in America, you would say that Olive Garden is not real Italian food. Applebee's, TGI Fridays, this stuff is a load of crap. My dad was just a food snob, but no, it's got nothing to do with that. My best friend in first grade was a black guy. We're not a racist family. So
okay, so when you told the story, I'm just curious. So when you told that anecdote, which clearly on the face of it is racist, right? You're basically saying your father made racist decisions about where you would go as a family to eat. Are you saying, well, I'm just going to ask you a question. Are you saying that when you told that story, you didn't mean to infer that he was racist? And do you understand why when somebody like me reads that anecdote for the first time, as I did this week, I reach a different conclusion?
Well, I understand what you're doing, which is a sort of making of a murderer. How did he become racist? Well, his father, he said, that's not real Italian food. Hang on, can I? I'm
literally reminding you of something you said on your show, which led me,
Well, and
which led
was
me to
said in
conclude a
jest.
certain thing. If I'm wrong, tell me.
Yeah, it was said in jest as a humorous anecdote, and now you're trying to spin it into a narrative, which is his parents are racist. He comes from a long line of racists. And I think everybody knows my parents are boomers. And these people come, well, you're a boomer, I guess, too, in a
I'm
way,
60.
right? You were born in 19. Yeah, so you're a boomer also. Or maybe you're a Gen Xer. I suppose it's sort of on the cusp. But it's a humorous anecdote. These are kind of the attitudes of baby boomers in society. But you're trying to spin it into a narrative, which is you're a product of your environment. Your dad's racist because of this joke. Now you're a racist. And I don't think that's a fair characterization.
Okay, people can make their own minds up. They can go back and listen to you say it. I mean, the beauty of what I'm going to talk to you about in this interview is that almost all of it is just going to be reminding you what you have said and asking you what you meant. Your position about that story is that it was a joke, okay? I want to come to something else you said. This is where you talk about Jews, women, and blacks. Let's just take a listen.
They're always coming up with, no, it's not the Jews. No, it's not women. No, it's not blacks. It's actually really complicated. No, it fucking isn't at all. Jews are running society. Women need to shut the fuck up. Blacks need to be imprisoned for the most part. And we would live in paradise. It's that simple.
Okay. Would you like to clarify what you meant there?
That's all true.
Now, we heard what he just said. He said that's all true. Now, watch how he's about to backtrack and contradict himself.
That's 100% true. Everything I said in that clip is true.
Including that blacks need to be imprisoned for the most part.
Yeah.
Okay. We know that the most part means 50% or higher. This is not easy. This is not complicated or complex math. This is not trigonometry, right? It's not calculus. It's easy math. Most means 50% or more. Let's see what Nick Fuentes is about to say here.
Yes.
But all of them?
No, for the most part.
What does the most part mean? What percentage of American blacks would you like to see in prison?
Whatever the percentages of the murderers. I think it's 1 in 20 black men will commit a murder in their lifetime. So maybe let's say that 5%.
Okay. So first and foremost, 5% isn't even half of 50%. That's not most black people, bro. Black people need to be imprisoned for the most part, is what he said. Then he doubled down in it. Piers Morgan lightly presses him on it, and he says the percentage of blacks that commit unalivings. That's what he just said. Then he goes on to say that that number is something along the lines of 1 in 20. Let's see what Piers says to him.
Oh, so you're talking about black people who murder people?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Which isn't what he said at all.
But you didn't say
that's
that.
the
You just
crime
said
problem.
blacks need to be imprisoned for the most part. You didn't clarify. You were talking about black murderers.
Right. No, you're right. That's a good addition to that.
I like how he responds or has this dramatic drawback, like, oh, that wasn't implied, Piers? Of course it wasn't implied. It's not what you said, bro. It's not what you said.
That's a great point.
Do you think it's funny or?
I think, yeah, I do. I think it's hilarious. I think it's totally true.
Do you think a black American would find it funny? You think that blacks should be imprisoned for the most part?
Blacks are my biggest fans. I get high fives all the time. They say, Nick Fuentes, I love your show. They agree with me. And you want to know why?
So first and foremost, he's lying. I think there is a considerable amount of so-called black individuals that watch Nick Fuentes' show because Nick Fuentes does say a lot of truth, even when it comes to the black community. Like I said at the beginning of this video, Nick Fuentes is also a liar, and he manipulates the facts because he knows people are too lazy to do their own research as we live in this popcorn microwave society when people only want to watch clips. 1 in 20 so-called black people are not murderers. The number is actually a lot less common than that. The number one fan or the biggest audience of Nick Fuentes' show are not black people. He said they're my biggest fan. They're not even one of your biggest fans. It's just not true. The biggest fan of a Nick Fuentes is a young Caucasian male. Young Caucasian men is the biggest fan of Nick Fuentes. So-called black people are going to fall somewhere towards the bottom of that.
Here's the difference. Black people are the most victimized by other black people. You think black people want to live in the hood and the ghetto and get shot all the time? That's what happens in the south side of Chicago. You should come here. I'll take you there. We could go to Garfield Park.
I went
go
to Chicago
Inglewood.
University for a year, actually, several years ago.
Yeah, that's a bubble. That's a bubble. You think you're in Chicago and Hyde Park? You don't know Chicago. Go a little bit west, see what it's like over there. And I'll tell you, black people agree with me because they're tired of it too. And maybe not most of them, but a lot of them agree with what I say about that because they know how it is. That's why the first thing they do when they make a little bit of money is they go and leave to another neighborhood.
Okay, so what was it? Just remind me.
Hold on. Well, let's back up here. Let's back up here. So this is what you call a half truth. All right. So let's walk this back. Black people are tired of other black people, and proof of that or evidence of that is because when they get a little bit of money, they move out the neighborhood. So first and foremost, that is a half truth because yes, that's true, but it's not because of black people. It's because they were poor, and now that they got some money, they've moved away and got away from the crime-infested neighborhood. You know who do this, generally speaking? All poor people, including the ones that have white skin or Caucasians that live in trailer parks, grew up around mostly other poor white people. When they get a little bit of money, maybe making $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year, they move away to a better neighborhood because it's safer for their children. But they grew up around mostly white people. It's not a skin color thing. You know who else does that? Middle class people, people who grew up in the middle class. Maybe they grew up in a household that made collectively somewhere around maybe $100,000, $150,000 a year. That's pretty good money. But let's say they go to college, maybe some Ivy League school. They come out on the other side and they're maybe working at some sort of investment firm, find themselves making $500,000 a year, maybe even somewhere upwards of $1 million a year. They're a millionaire. You think they're going to move back to that middle class neighborhood that they lived in that was fairly safe? No, they're going to step it up a notch. They're going to move from that neighborhood to maybe a Beverly Hills, to a Calabasas, to another upper echelon gated community, maybe some secluded area on the north side of Los Angeles somewhere. So this is very common. It's not about black people.
Again, the percentage of black men who commit murder in America, what was the percentage you gave me?
It's 1 in 20. 1 in 20.
It's 1 in 100.
No, it's 1 in 20.
No. Less than 1 in 100 black US men commit murder.
Now, you're going to hear Nick Fuentes say at some point in this, I believe this clip here, I think I have it included here. You're going to hear Nick Fuentes say at some point, well, don't ask me, you're the one, or maybe he's already said it. Don't ask me, you're the one with the research team. I don't have a research team. We know, Nick. That's why we're making reaction videos, because you did quite a bit of lying in this interview, bro. You did some truth telling. You told a lot of truth as well, but you told a lot of lies. It is not 1 in 20. It's closer to 1 in 100, which is a huge difference. And what does he do? This is how you know that he's not behaving in good faith. An individual that's behaving in good faith would hear the facts represented to him, and then he'd say, I didn't know that. I'm still not so sure about it, but let me look into that. Or maybe you're right. I was wrong. Let me double back. Instead, he goes, no, that's not right. That's called cognitive dissonance. That's called willful ignorance. That's called doubling down in your own ignorance. That's what that's called.
That's the most up-to-date crime statistics in America.
That's not true. I've seen other statistics. They say 1 in 20 will eventually commit a murder.
So you're right.
So that's a lot of people did not catch that. So now he's talking about 1 in 20 will. 1 in 20 will. We're talking about what do the data say about what's currently taking place, right? What's currently taking place. And here's the thing. I have to say this before we get too deep into this video. Nick Fuentes is a self-proclaimed white supremacist. Depending on the interview, depending on his mood, he will deny that particular label. But he's in other interviews admitted that he's a white supremacist. He's admitted that he is a racist, which again, I don't really care about that. Be what you want to be, feel how you want to feel. But I'm ultimately mentioning it in this sense to say Nick Fuentes does not care about black on black crime. He just doesn't. Nick Fuentes cares about if white people are affected by black people, right? And I've said it before, I'm going to say it again. Most white people who are victims of violent crime is perpetuated by another white person. More than 80% of white people who are the victims of violent crime are the victims by other white people, which means, Nick, if you truly cared, that's what you should be talking about. But you're not talking about that. And we have to ask ourselves, why?
It means that you're saying that 5 times as many black men commit murder as the official crime statistics say.
Yeah, there's a report, I believe, on X by Data Hazard. I'll have to go and double check that for you. But yes, there's some pretty shocking evidence that says that it's far more alarming than you would think.
Okay, but you would accept that the official crime statistics are 1 in 100, or you wouldn't accept that statistic?
I don't know. I don't have it in front of me, but I've seen other evidence. Like I said, Data Hazard on X, I believe, produced a report about a year ago. It said 1 in 20. But I mean, whether it's 1 in 20 or 1 in 100, that's a lot of people, Piers. I mean,
Sure,
this is
a lot of white
problem.
people commit murder too. Well, they do, don't they?
Okay, but it's about proportionality. I mean, white people are 65% of the population. Blacks are 13%.
We have to stop this. Whites are 65% of the population. Blacks are 13%. Nick Fuentes, how do you know that? Nick Fuentes, that's actually not true. First and foremost, what he's talking about is what the census says. Do you know that many people, a lot of people, a huge portion of the country does not even participate in the census? So 13% is a fraudulent number. So-called black people make a much higher percentage. I would argue that it's probably somewhere closer in between 16 and 20% of the country. It's not 13% anymore. Another thing is, what are we classifying as black? Because y'all using this color, which is very, very sneaky. And I don't appreciate it because y'all will lump in a lot of people into this black category, but you don't do it for white people. What do I mean? So-called black Americans, who are the descendants of slaves, is what black American is supposed to mean. You have some cases where you have a lot of biracial, so a huge percentage of the black population that are biracial, that's considered black. Many people will say, well, what's the problem? Well, if you have a person that's half white, half black, and they commit a crime, does that fall in the white category or the black category? They're going to always lump them into the black category. Why they don't get lumped into the white category too? You got so-called black foreigners that come over here. Some of them get lumped into the black category as well. Why? Completely different people. Our skin color just look the same. Completely different people. So what are we talking about here? We need to be specific with our language.
And I think anybody would tell you that more black people proportionally commit violent crime than white people. And people vote with their feet. People would rather property tax.
Most mass
what's
shootings.
with the interruptions?
I'm sorry.
That's very interesting that he said what's with the interruptions, because as you all, for those of you that have already watched this interview, and it's probably going to be displayed in this clip as well, they're going to interrupt each other quite a bit. And it's a very common thing in debates and conversations. You cut each other off. It's just a natural way to talk. Nick is going to cut Piers off multiple times, but he wants this special treatment.
Thank you. I appreciate that. You know, you look at in Chicago, in New York, these neighborhoods are so stratified. People would rather pay a high tax rate. They'd rather pay a much higher property value to live in a less diverse, less black neighborhood because they don't want to live around the violence. And I think that when you look at even on the public transit, the subway, the blue line, you know, people don't want to go there because they know who occupies and menaces the public transit. It is these people like Daniel Penny had to deal with. It's people like Irina Zarutska had to deal with. And that's just the uncomfortable reality.
Okay, so there's so many things there. First and foremost, if you move away from an area or you avoid areas that are crime infested, there's nothing wrong with that. I don't care what the people look like. There's nothing wrong with that. But we need to be crystal clear about what we're really describing here. Do you all know that in between 80 to 90% of most countries in the world are what you call homogenous, which means that for the most part, they share the same ethnicity, religion, culture, and the list goes on. So generally speaking, there's nothing wrong with that. People tend to flock with those that agree with them, that look like them, that have the same traditions as them. That's not racist. And if it is racist, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But if you're avoiding crime, what's the problem? It's only the United States of America that's this huge melting pot, right? This multi-diverse country, almost like nowhere else you can find in the world. And also the two examples he gave, Daniel Penny, who did he unalive? Wait, the other situation in Charlottesville, North Carolina, wherever it was, on the train, I'm still not so sure that even happened. I've talked about this multiple times on the channel and on Patreon. There's a high chance that situation was AI. But even if it wasn't AI generated and it was a real situation, the individual that allegedly perpetuated this horrible act on this woman was a schizophrenic mental health crisis individual. That's kind of important to reference when you're talking about these things, Nick Fuentes. You're using these only using these examples because there is no epidemic of white people being attacked by black people in public. There just isn't. You're not going to find the data to support it. You're just saying things. And the fact that you live in Chicago is also skewing your perception on what the rest of the country is dealing with as it pertains to violence, not as it pertains to behaviors, ghetto behavior. Two separate conversations.
You've also said you don't want to live near black people. Let's take a listen to this clip.
I'm a new generation of white person. I'm not living around blacks. Sorry.
What's new about that? This is what I mean with Nick Fuentes. He makes it sound like he's this revolutionary individual. He's this catalyst. He's leading the charge of it's a changing of the guard. Nah, buddy, calm down. You ain't changing nothing. This is nothing new. If you don't know, America historically and still today is extremely segregated. Not just our schools, but where people live. Most of that is systemic, and part of it is also by choice. Because again, people typically want to live with those that relate to them, whether that be by way of tax bracket, whether that be by way of lifestyle, culture, religion, backstory. What are we talking about here, Nick Fuentes? You're not leading the charge in anything different, bro. You're just a part of a larger group of people that's been doing this for generations.
You know, I want white kids, and I don't want my white kids bringing home black people to marry. It's racial for me. And call me racist. Oh, very Christian of you. I don't give a fuck.
Oh, boy. So I want you to imagine something. I want you to imagine that you claim to be Christian or Catholic, which I think there's a distinction there. You claim to believe in Jesus Christ, which is no laughing matter. It's no playing matter, right? Because this is a matter of salvation, right? Life and death, and then the afterlife. This is extremely serious, as serious as it can get, right? We're talking about our soul, the destiny of our souls. I want you to imagine that this is what you identify as, is a huge part of your identity because you talk about it quite a bit. You're making fun of Protestants and other religions, right? But then you hear yourself in a very provocative manner, in a very bold manner, proclaim to be racist. It's racist for me. The clip is played back to you. And then to avoid the embarrassment of this horrible thing that you just said, you put on this fake smirk as if to say, yep, I said it and I stand on it, when you know that that's incongruent, inconsistent with anything that Christ stood for. Who are you, Nick Fuentes? Who are you? And a bigger question is, who is the people that's following you? Who are those people? Who is your base? As they hear this and they justify it. No one's justifying that you want to avoid criminals. I'm with you on that, brother. There's nothing wrong with that. But you are doubling down in pure hatred. And like the immature, emotional boy child that you are, you just smirk it off like it's a laughing matter.
I mean, it couldn't be clearer, really, unless you want to say that's another of your jokes. But you're basically saying, yeah, I'm a racist, aren't you?
Look at his face.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Wow.
You're fine with saying you're a racist?
Totally. I think everybody's racist.
There it is. This is first and foremost, this is Nick Fuentes' approach, being able to go back to his base, being able to go back to his own podcast and say, look, guys, I was able to go on Piers Morgan Uncensored, and I doubled down. The spooky ookie Nick Fuentes finally made his appearance on Piers Morgan. And look, guys, I'm not a coward. I stood on the things that I've been saying for years. Nobody's done that. He's doing this for attention. He's doing this to get the adulation from his audience. This is a pride thing. And also for him to say everybody's racist, listen to what he's about to say.
I think everybody, if we're being honest, is racist. I think everybody, the only people that aren't racist or pretend not to be are white people to their detriment. Everybody else is racist.
But earlier in the interview, you got aggrieved at the idea that your father was a racist. You wanted to make him.
My father's. He's not. Because my father doesn't share my same views on that.
So he's the exception to the everyone's a racist.
Boom. Got him. As he sits there with his slightly confused look. You just said that you think everybody's a little bit racist. But earlier in the interview, you said that your father isn't racist.
Well, everybody's a little bit racist. You're right. So maybe everybody. The difference is you're attacking my father. You know, he came from his job.
I'm not attacking your father.
That somebody's attacking his father, bro. You sound like a victim. No, he's not, bro. Stop it. The amount of times you go after people, he's mentioning something you said yourself about your father. And you want to play the victim role and say he's attacking him.
You are.
No, I'm not. I don't know your father. And to be clear, I have no knowledge about him at all.
Well, then let's leave him out of it. Let's leave him out of it if you don't know him.
Hang on, Nick. You put that story into the
Man.
public domain
That's such a feminine way to hold your hand, bro. I don't know men that do that.
on your show. I'm simply reminding you of what you told everybody, millions of people, about your father. If you now want to retract it, fine. If you want to say it was a joke, which is what your position was earlier, fine. But I'm allowed to put to you things you've said publicly. That's not unfair. That's not me targeting your father. You put that story
Bingo.
about him out
You know
there.
what you're doing. You know what
I'm
you're
asking you about a pretty shocking anecdote, which to me looked like you were saying your father made decisions about where you as a family would eat based on skin color of people who worked at these places. If you say, or use them, if you say that is not what you meant, that's fine. You can respond any way you like. But the idea I can ask you about it without you saying I'm attacking your father is ridiculous.
Well, you are, and you know what you're doing. And there's a political culture in America where if you have the wrong views, you get fired from your job. And my father has a job. And if you go on here and say you charge him with racism or something, and I'm put in a position where I don't look like I'm sticking to my guns if I don't say my father's a racist, you're putting him in jeopardy. And he's not here to defend himself or explain his views. And it's very low. And I think you know exactly what you're doing, and people can see what you're doing. I'll defend my views. And I think that, so let's leave him out of it. Let's just not talk about my father, because my father isn't here. I'm here.
Okay, well, then do you accept that you shouldn't?
And
Listen, that's fine. But then do you accept you shouldn't talk about your father on your show?
Right.
You shouldn't tell.
Absolutely not.
But that's hypocrisy, dude. See, that's pride. Look at his face. That's pride. Because he makes a fair point. If his dad isn't there to defend himself and he could potentially lose his job, then that's fair. But then you go on to say, but these very things that you're mentioning about my father, I can say them myself on my podcast. What?
It's fine for you to put a story out there which would make most people who listened to that story or watched it at the time on your show conclude that he was racist. It's fine for you to do that. But if I then ask you about it, I'm the one who's being unfair and I've crossed a line. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you're
That's
being
fine.
malicious.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Listen, people are watching this live. They can draw their own conclusions about whether what I just
And they
did.
will.
Yeah, and I'm
And
sure
they will.
afterwards, by the way, you'll say, he ambushed me with your own with your
no,
own
no,
words.
whoa.
With their own words.
That's actually a very fair thing to say about you, Nick Fuentes. You say that about everybody, dude, that you've interviewed with, just about. Some of the biggest content creators, you said they all stabbed you in the back. Ian Carroll, Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson.
That's a little presumptuous. I'm not going to say it's an ambush, but I think that's a low blow. And I think you know what you're doing, and that's fine. You're a tabloid journalist. I expected that. I don't think it's an ambush because I knew it would be like this. And people will see what you're doing, and I think they'll say it's low. But as far as you want to talk about racism,
I do.
Let's talk about racism.
Okay,
Let's leave my dad out of it.
Look, you've admitted you're a racist, correct?
Yes, 100%.
Okay.
Own it.
Okay, that's fine.
Boy. What man says that? Own it. Why did he say it like that?
Entitled in a free democratic society to stare down the barrel of his camera and tell me you're a racist. People can judge you accordingly. Many people who have assumed that you're a racist will now have heard it from your own lips. That's fine.
There you go.
That's the point. The point of this interview is to go over the things you've said, which have led people to reach conclusions about you, and to ascertain whether those conclusions are fair and reasonable or not. That's it.
Thank
so I want
you.
to play you another clip. This is what you talk about why white people are justified in being racist. Let's take a listen to this.
First, white people are every single bit justified in being racist. Every single bit justified, to the extent that that means going out of your way to avoid black people when you see them.
I don't think that that's racist. I don't think, generally speaking, if you avoid someone that looks dangerous to you, that is a black person, then I don't think that that's racist. But generally speaking, avoiding all black people, what are you talking about here? It's clear to me, Nick Fuentes did not grow up with black people. Let me be clear about what I mean. That does not mean that he didn't see them around and about. What I mean is he's never really truly had any black friends talking like that, because this is only the behavior of someone who's been radicalized, living in a city like Chicago, where the crime is so high there, and you watch television, and then these stereotypes and these, the criminality of these gang members that are black is glorified on television and in the music. So now you think that represents a bigger percentage of the population of the black community than it actually is.
You stand by that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So white people should go out of their way to avoid black people when they see them.
Absolutely. They would be wise.
Why?
Because it's a lose-lose proposition. If you're Irina Zarutska and you don't walk the other way, you get stabbed to death and you die. If you're somebody else and you walk on the subway and you stand near a black person or something, maybe it's fine. It's a lose-lose proposition.
Bro, what? Once again, that's another thing from Nick Fuentes. That made no sense. He said it's a lose-lose, and then he gives you two different examples where one of those examples is literally a win. He said Irina Zarutska gets unalived, which, by the way, not sure that situation even happened to begin with, but even if it did, the guy who did this to her, that horrible act, was schizophrenic. Nick Fuentes doesn't care about that context. He says in the second example, or maybe you're another person that comes on stands by a black person and nothing happens to you. How is that a lose? There's nothing. What?
So no, I think that white people have been beaten into submission, that we're afraid to tell the truth about it. And the truth is that when you go into these major cities like New York or Chicago, I believe she was in North Carolina, there is a menace, which is young, black, adolescent men. They're extremely violent. And we have been told that we have to pretend like they are every other person. We have to be colorblind to that. And we're supposed to go and be in the midst of all this danger. And I think that at this point, it's gotten out of control. You look at the BLM movement, they said that the reason that black people, are violent, or the reason there's crime, is because of police brutality, or redlining, or all these other things. They said we need to get rid of the police. We need to defund them. And a lot of cities did. A lot of cities like Chicago, for example, the police changed the rules of engagement. They don't chase. It's not a felony if you steal a certain amount of merchandise. They won't chase them on foot. And now the city's totally up for grabs.
He's being anecdotal. Now, let's be clear. I think there's a such thing as hood fatigue. So actually, I partially agree with the things that Nick is saying, but Nick is going so far that he's basically lying about the reality of things, right? I think there's a percentage of young black males that are violent. But when you look at the totality of the so-called black community, there is less than 1% of the black community that's violent. Did you hear what I just said? It's like 0.05%. So again, Nick, if the only cities in the country was New York, Chicago, St. Louis, and Detroit, then I'm with you. But there's another 95% of the country that exists, bro.
And now, whether you're in the Gold Coast or whether you're on the Mag Mile or you're in the worst neighborhoods in the city, you might get shot, you might get mugged, someone might run up on you. And I tell my followers, it is better to be perceived as racist or racist and walk the other way and maybe keep your life than to say, I'm a good anti-racist. I don't mind that this person's making me uncomfortable. Maybe he's looking a little froggy. I'm going to sit down because I'm a good person and get stabbed, mugged, whatever. And by the way, this is a strategy. They call it the friendly stranger. There's a crew of them. They do this in Chicago. They stand outside bars, black people. They approach strangers. It's a robbery crew. And they pretend to be a friendly stranger and then they mug them.
Once again, anecdotal. In Chicago, one of the slimiest, grimiest, gang-infested places you can go in the country. This is not most black people, dude. And look, I'm just going to end it here because I'm repeating myself. He's just going to espouse a lot more nonsense. Look, I agree with many things that Nick Fuentes says, but I also disagree with a lot of his positions. I think he's been a provocateur and exaggerating on purpose because he knows that the data does not support many of the things that he's saying. So he's going off experience. But when you go off experience, then most times in society, white people are not being attacked. Innocent white people are not being attacked by black people. It just does not happen at an alarming rate. It just doesn't. I think you should do what's best for your safety, regardless of the person's skin color, including black people. I do agree with that part. But to paint this in a way, the data just don't support it.
Groypers or groomers. So over the past several months, I've shared a few of Nick Fuentes' videos because I agree with a lot of his stances on like Israel, the current condition of the United States of America. I agree with. But this video you're about to see is beyond disturbing, and it's a line as a society that we have agreed we're not going to cross. It's not out of context. I found other videos that support the original video. Can't with this. Like I'm sorry, I can't. Not any of this.
Same thing goes with women. I don't want to turn 30 and find some 20-year-old, 29-year-old woman that I have something in common with. And it's like, hey, properly aged like wine. Women don't age like wine. They age like milk. They don't age like wine. That's not how their hormones work. That's not how they work.
Yeah, I gotta find my 16-year-old wife. Let's say I get married to the 18-year-old now. 6-year age difference. When I turn 40, she's gonna be 34. Ew. What if I'm 30 and she's 16? 14-year age difference. Then now we're talking here. Now we're cooking with gas. I want a 16-year-old that's untouched, pristine, untouched, uncorrupted, innocent. That's what we all want. I think the age of consent should be lower. I don't even really believe in the concept. I'm banning people. If you're telling me to stop, you're gone. Bye. Fuck you. I'm out here free thinking, okay? And if I've got weird sexual interests...
Why are you hanging out with children?
Well, you know, they're hotter. Based. Let's fucking go. That's why we love them.
Anyways, do you consider Chris Hansen a hero? I grew up with this guy, so I consider him a hero.
He's like the pedo catcher guy. Yeah, I mean, I guess. I mean, certainly some of that can be considered heroic, but I've said this before, the pedo catcher stuff, a lot of it I really think is a grift, and a lot of it I think is just hysteria. What you tend to see with the pedo catchers is a lot of the people that they catch are just like disgusting, ugly freaks. And then a catfish, and okay, obviously it's super bad if they're like under the age of 15, let's say, because that's like prepubescent. But if there's like a 15-year-old, someone who purports to be like 15 and is really attractive, and they're giving a really disgusting freak a lot of attention, you have to wonder, like, is that person a pedophile?
Yeah, so Nick, this isn't thought leader type material, bud. Like at all. Like this is like hard drive check aisle 5 for Fuentes type material. But you actually believe this. You're promoting this on your channel to millions of people, and it's disgusting. You need to repent, Nick. This is the line that we don't cross in America. Being America first means that we need to protect the most vulnerable among us, which is our children, Nick Fuentes.
Oh yeah, Didi got a podcast.